From day one, this administration has made clear that a border wall is not the answer. That remains our position, and our position has never wavered.
That was Alejandro Mayorkas, Homeland Security Secretary in the Biden administration, running apparent defense after President Biden approved additional construction of the border wall. He insisted the reporting was taken out of context. President Biden, on the other hand, doubled down yesterday, defending his move to pick back up where Trump left off, building more border barriers. Take a look.
Border wall, the money was appropriated for the border wall. I tried to get them to reappropriate, to redirect that money. They didn't, they wouldn't. And in the meantime, there's nothing under the law other than they have to use the money for what it was appropriated. I can't stop that.
Do you believe the border wall works?
No. Okay, thank you.
Meanwhile, White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre was grilled on Biden's apparent flip-flop. Let's watch.
If the border wall is ineffective, why is the Homeland Security Secretary saying that it's necessary to prevent unlawful entries into the United States?
I have not seen that full statement. I know. I hear you. I'm just saying I have not seen his full statement on that. What I can speak to is for the president. The president's been very clear that he doesn't believe it's effective. He answered that question of your colleague. That's what I can speak to. That's what we're going to talk about. And we've actually said there are smarter ways and more effective ways in dealing with this.
Meanwhile, HUD Secretary Julian Castro blasted Biden's decision, calling out yet another promise that appears to have been broken. Watch.
It looks like this is a promise broken. There's no easy way to describe this other than a flip-flop from President Biden. He said in the 2020 campaign that he would not build another foot of Trump's border wall, that it was a waste of money, it didn't make any sense. This is responsive to the pressure, especially the attacks from Republicans that Biden has gotten, that I think he and his team are probably afraid is making him seem too soft on immigration. And so they're taking a political gamble here.
Well, this is quite a mess for the Biden administration, right? As you've got people like Julian Castro calling out the Biden administration for flip-flopping. Obviously, this is a big difference from what Joe Biden said when he declared that there would not be another foot of border wall built on his watch. And then obviously the cleanup on this, I feel like, has made it even worse. So let's talk a little bit about that, Jessica. You know, in the statement that went out attributed to the Department of Homeland Security, the quote was, "There is presently an acute and immediate need for more wall to be built at the border." And they cited this number of how many, multiple hundreds of thousands of illegal immigrants had unlawfully crossed. So how is that not a change from the Biden administration's position, where they've claimed for, 2+ years, 3 years, that the border is under operational control? There is no crisis. The border is closed. How can any of that be true from the last 3 years when now they're saying there's an acute and immediate need for a wall at the border?
Yeah, I think just for Biden to say the wall's ineffective and then say it needs to be built are very clear contradictory statements. If the wall is ineffective and people are climbing over it, and you want to stop migration for whatever reason over the southern border, why would you continue to build the wall? It makes absolutely no sense whatsoever, which I think calls into question not Biden's dishonesty, but how involved he is in a lot of the major policy making. This was an issue that he assigned to Kamala Harris as her task as vice president. Immigration across the southern border is what she was tasked to handle explicitly, and it's by far this administration's weakest policy. And so I question the impeachment inquiry against President Biden and wonder if these folks really would want Kamala Harris to become the president of the United States. Obviously, the inquiry is not just to get rid of Biden. They want to really see if there's something there with Burisma. But let's think about how poor of a job Kamala Harris has done as VP, if this is what we're dealing with right now, these contradictory statements, these policies that they campaigned on, that now they're just pursuing more of the same of what Donald Trump was doing. That's absolutely insane coming from the Democratic Party.
Well, and what's interesting, too, is part of the White House's and Karine Jean-Pierre sort of scrambling to handle this emerging new crisis on top of the border crisis, obviously. You have them claiming that, this was funding and border construction that was approved under our predecessor, so we don't have a choice but to follow the law. Like, they're claiming that they're following the law by doing this and they don't have a choice. But if the law required them to build this stretch of border wall, were they just ignoring the law for the last 3 years? Why didn't they start this before? And why, especially, has the Biden administration actually been auctioning off components used to build border walls along the southern border, sort of trying to remove Congress's ability to potentially require them to use it to do exactly now what they're doing in Texas? It seems like it just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. And I think the thing that's sort of missing from a lot of the conversations about this is the fact that just building this section of border wall in Texas does not actually fix the border crisis, because this is way more than just an issue of walls. Because again, without the complete closure of the southern border, you're not actually going to cut off unlawful crossings. And especially as long as you have the policies in place that the Biden administration has implemented, it's just going to get even worse and worse. And so you have mayors in New York, mayors in Chicago, mayors across California saying this is untenable, but the Biden administration is just sort of slapping kind of a Band-Aid on it and expecting a thumbs up from everyone, when it's not going to change if you don't return to policies in some variation of remain in Mexico, have something, akin to Title 42. You have to have actual policies in place to actually control this and shut this down. Another stretch of border wall just isn't going to do it.
Yeah, the construction of the border wall was the one policy we were running against. Trump's campaigning around build the wall led the Democrats to a position of absolutely no wall. And this is the one migration policy they are continuing. We're not saying that we want the administration to ignore immigration over the southern border because we're cool with having an open border. No Democrats are saying that. They're saying we absolutely need immigration policy. We need to address the harmful sanctions against Venezuela. We need to have some reckoning with the turmoil we caused across Latin America in the 70s and 80s through our coups and destabilization of the region, through CIA intervention and democratic elections abroad. We really need some reckoning with how much of this was caused by the United States, but we also need a sensible immigration policy, a process for people seeking asylum to receive their work visas, to work legally in the United States. We need policy at all. And the one policy that they decided to pursue was the continuation of the border wall, and they didn't have to. And you're right, we really need people talking about this. One person who is progressive Congresswoman from New York, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She criticized Biden's backpedaling, and people have criticized her for visiting the border under Trump, but not under Biden. So people really want to see her say something about this, and she did. She wrote a statement that was released yesterday where she said, quote, "The Biden administration was not required to expand construction of the border wall. And they certainly were not required to waive several environmental laws to expedite the building. The president needs to take responsibility for this decision and reverse the course." So there you have it. There's AOC saying it directly.
Meanwhile, Republican Texas Senator Ted Cruz also criticized the administration, accusing Biden of not genuinely caring about the migrant crisis. Watch.
They're experiencing now what we've been saying for a long time, which is this is a crisis. It's out of control. But I do not believe for a minute Joe Biden wants to fix it. I think this is all window dressing to pretend he cares. His objective is he wants even more illegal immigrants.
I think Senator Cruz on that point is right. Obviously the sort of the rollout of this policy of the Biden administration now constructing a border wall was not smooth. And it seems like Karine Jean-Pierre maybe actually had not even seen this listed in the Federal Register before it became a major news item, which is obviously another breakdown of communication strategy within the Biden administration. But I do think there's sort of a clock on this where the question is, how long will it take after this, where you had the White House seemingly contradicting and even Secretary Mayorkas trying to contradict what was published? How long until this becomes a point that they are actually using and touting to say, well, we're dealing with the border crisis. We're adding more wall to this. This is exactly what Donald Trump was doing and what he said we should do. And so we're serious about addressing this border crisis. But as I mentioned before, not actually doing anything to address any policy to change, to reduce the draw on people, to change the reason why so many people are risking their lives or their families and children's lives to make that dangerous journey in a way that obviously just enriches these barbaric cartels in Mexico. How long do you think it'll take before you see the White House starting to turn the corner on this and say, well, no, we're actually handling the border. It's totally fine. We're building a wall.
Well, the first thing that's going to need to happen, as you point out, is the press secretary is going to need to be on the same page as the administration, which has not been the case in a lot of recent press conferences. And so I'm not sure what's going on there. It's really curious as to why Karine Jean-Pierre is not given proper information or briefing from the administration, or if this is an intentional spin and their internal policy is different from what policy they're going to communicate to the public, which is a huge mistake on behalf of the Biden administration. Listen, if you are okay with constructing the border wall and you're like, listen, there's a group of people in the United States that really want this wall built, and maybe we can win over some Americans if we just build the wall. Who cares if it's ineffective? It creates jobs. Let's build a wall on the southern border and satisfy this group of voters. Fine, own it. Say that's what you're doing. Say, you know what? This is good infrastructure. We want to build the wall so that we have official stations where we will actually legally process migrants coming over the southern border. Say anything but what you're saying right now. And so I really see this moving forward in a way where they're going to have to apologize clearly for what they've done here, which is to lie about what their policy is. And so when you have prominent members of Congress like AOC from within the party criticizing you to this extent and accurately doing it, you're going to need an apology. So it's going to need an apology, and then probably a policy proposal for Congress, legislation-wise, as to what we need to change immigration reform-wise so that people can cross the southern border legally seeking asylum and be processed properly and documented within the United States. Because that's the main concern of a lot of Republicans, is that a lot of these folks are undocumented. They're still calling them illegal immigrants. They are coming across legally. It's just that we don't have a clear process for giving those seeking asylum the proper legal paperwork. It's a failure infrastructure-wise. We haven't put the manpower or infrastructure on the southern border to process the migrants coming across it. It's still happening legally. We just aren't providing them with the paperwork. And so that's really what needs to change. We need that kind of immigration reform. And if you want to think about things in the bigger picture economically, I think the administration also would be very smart to say, you know what, we're either lowering interest rates or we're going to put some public spending towards job creation so that we can actually handle this influx of workers without having workers competing for wages. So it's going to have to be a shift from their current policy of wanting to reduce employment and raise unemployment levels because they think that will resolve inflation, when we know very well it won't and has not for quite some time.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. There is a difference, I would just point out, between people who turn themselves in seeking asylum at a port of entry and the hundreds of thousands or, upwards of millions since Biden took office who have unlawfully crossed not at those official ports of entry. But one thing definitely right on, Karine Jean-Pierre seems to never actually be given the same music that the rest of the administration is playing from. Definitely something that we will continue to cover. There will be more rising right after this.